The gavel came down at $75. Roy Fenwick laughed before the sound of the wood had finished. He laughed the way a man laughs when he already knows he has won something. Walter Kessler did not look up. He wrote the number in a small notebook, closed it, and put it back in his coat pocket. The vault sat on a pallet in the gravel lot behind the Merrow County Courthouse annex steel box, 4 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. 640 pounds. Rust had eaten the paint down to a color that was not quite brown and not quite orange. The combination dial had frozen sometime around the Eisenhower administration. Nobody else in the lot had noticed the seam along the back panel. Walter had. A second weld, added later, done by a man in a hurry. It was March 4th, 1994. 34 degrees. Wind coming sideways off the grain elevators. 40, maybe 50 people stood around stamping their feet, waiting for something better to bid on. $75, Fenwick said again, grinning at the crowd, for 600 pounds of rust. Somebody's optimistic. The crowd laughed the way a crowd does. Not because it was funny, because Fenwick had laughed first. Walter Kessler was 71 years old, 5'9", shoulders still wide from 40 years of leaning into steel doors that did not want to open. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, the kind of scars that come from slip picks and pinched fingers, not from fighting. His eyes were gray, the color of an overcast sky, and they moved slowly across a room, cataloging instead of searching. He wore a canvas coat with a torn left cuff that his late wife had meant to mend for 11 years. He had a habit. When he was thinking, he tapped his front tooth once with his thumbnail. He did it now, looking at the seam on the back of the vault. Walter Kessler had been the only locksmith in 3 counties for 42 years. His father had taught him on Army surplus footlockers in 1952 in a shed that smelled like linseed oil and cold iron. A lock does not keep secrets, his father used to say. It keeps time. Walter had never fully understood the sentence until he was much older, and by then his father was gone, and there was no one left to ask what he'd meant. The trade had mostly died around him. Digital keypads. Companies that flew a man in from Omaha for $400 to do what Walter did for $60. He kept his shop open anyway. Rent was cheap and his hands still worked. He signed for the vault and paid in cash for 20s and a 5, folded soft from his wallet. Roy Fenwick was a tall man, silver suit, gold pocket watch he checked more than he needed to. He drove a new Cadillac Coupe de Ville, cream-colored, parked crooked across 2 spaces so nobody could miss it. His hair was combed back with something that held it in place, even in the wind. He worked federal surplus auctions across 4 states and had a reputation for talking fast and moving faster. You know what's usually in these county rejects? Fenwick said, loud enough for the whole lot to hear. Mouse nests. Old tax forms nobody wanted then and nobody wants now. He grinned at Walter. Hope you didn't need that $75 for something important, old-timer. Somebody in a feed cap laughed. A woman near the coffee truck laughed. They laughed because Fenwick was loud and rich and standing in the middle of the lot like he owned the weather. Walter said nothing. He did not answer. He had learned a long time ago that answering a loud man in front of a crowd only fed the noise. He signed the last line of the paperwork and asked the forklift driver, a boy named Denny, to load it onto his truck bed. Subscribe prompt. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Walter Kessler's are exactly who abandoned government buildings was built for. The vault had come out of the Merrow County Courthouse annex, condemned in 1991 after the roof gave out in a hailstorm. The annex had been built in 1938, part of a WPA project, brick and limestone, meant to hold county records that the main courthouse had no room for. For a while it held deeds, tax rolls, and marriage licenses. Starting in 1949, the county clerk began storing a different kind of file there, sealed adoption records, kept under Nebraska law until the child named in them reached a certain age or until a specific date passed, whichever came first. In November of 1950, a woman named Eleanor Voss had signed relinquishment papers for a son she had carried alone, without a husband, in a town that did not forgive women for that in 1950. She left a letter with the file. County policy required it be sealed with a record for 44 years, a compromise, worked out after a lawsuit in 1948, meant to give a birth mother time to reconsider without forcing an early reunion. 44 years. Almost nobody in the clerk's office understood why that specific number had been chosen. Walter's father had installed the vault's original lock in 1951. He never told Walter what was inside it. He only said once that some locks were not meant to be picked. They were meant to be waited out. The county closed the annex, moved the newer records, and let the vault sit uncatalogued for 3 years until state auditors flagged it for disposal. Nobody read the tag on the back that said retain until 1994. It went to auction with everything else. Walter drove it home at 31 miles an hour, 22 miles a county road, wipers going against the light snow that had started up out of nowhere. Word got to his shop before he did. Denny had told his uncle told the diner, and by the time Walter backed his truck into the alley behind his shop, 3 people had already asked what was in it. Probably nothing, Walter told them. He had learned that too. He used the engine hoist to walk the vault off the tailgate and into his workshop, an old garage with a wood stove and a workbench warm pail in the middle from 40 years of steel resting on it. He shut the door. He turned the radio off. He pulled his stool close, put on his reading glasses, and set a single work lamp so the light fell straight down on the dial, the way his father had taught him. The first attempt got him nothing. The tumblers were seized with rust, and the dial would not turn past 40. He worked penetrating oil into the seam with a syringe, then sat back and waited. 20 minutes. He made coffee he did not drink. His right knee, which had given him trouble since a fall in 1979, ached from the cold concrete floor, and he shifted his weight without complaint. Second attempt. The dial gave half a turn before locking again. He checked his notes twice, the way he checked everything twice, a habit that had saved him more times than luck ever had. He was not sure, this time, that it would open at all. There was a moment, sitting in that cold garage with his hands going stiff, when he wondered if his eyes and his hands had finally gotten too old for a job like this. He almost called the county back and told them to send a man from Omaha. He did not call. He put more oil in the seam and waited again. Third attempt, past 10 that night. The dial turned. Something inside gave way with a sound smaller than he expected. Not a bang, barely a click like a knuckle popping. The door did not swing open. It eased forward an inch on its own weight. Cold air came out first, colder than the garage, and dry, carrying the smell of old paper and iron and something faintly sweet underneath, like dust that had once been perfume. Walter did not reach inside. He sat on his stool, hands on his knees, and looked into the dark opening for a long moment before he moved. Inside, the county's financial ledgers sat first, brittle bond certificates from 1949, a small tin box of coins worth perhaps $300 to a collector. He set each one on the bench before reaching for the next, the way his father had taught him. Under the coins, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, was a manila folder, and inside it, a single sealed envelope. The folder was the adoption file. The envelope, addressed in a woman's careful hand, read simply, "For my son, when the waiting is done." Walter sat with it a long time before opening it. His hands, steady enough for locks, were not entirely steady now. He put his glasses back on, though they had not slipped. He unfolded the letter along creases already worn soft, as if someone long ago had folded and unfolded it many times before it was sealed away. The letter was 4 paragraphs, dated November 12, 1950. Eleanor Voss wrote that she had named him before she signed the papers, though the name was never used. She wrote that she thought of him on his birthday every year without fail. Near the end, she had written one line that Walter read twice. "I did not give you away because I did not want you. I gave you the only thing I had, which was a chance." Walter sat in the quiet workshop for 11 minutes. He knew because the stove clock ticked loud in that kind of silence. He heard the wind working at the loose flashing on his own roof, and somewhere down the alley, a dog barking twice and then stopping. He did not cry. He wiped his hands on his trousers, folded the letter back along its old lines, and set it gently on top of the folder. Then he went inside, made a fresh pot of coffee, and went to bed. In the morning, he called the county clerk's office as soon as it opened. He did not call a reporter. He drove the folder and the letter to the courthouse himself, 31 miles an hour again, and handed it across the counter to a clerk half his age who did not understand at first what she was holding. It took the county 9 days to locate Eleanor Voss's son through adoption records cross-referenced with the file. His name was Thomas Reyes. He had been searching for his birth mother, on and off, for 22 years, ever since his adoptive parents told him the truth on his own 18th birthday. He had written 4 letters to the county over the decades. Each one came back the same way. File sealed, retention date not yet reached. Thomas Reyes was 44 years old the week the vault opened. Roy Fenwick heard about it from Denny's uncle, in the same diner where everything else traveled. He drove past Walter's shop twice that week, slower than usual, and did not honk or wave the way he had at the auction. Within a year, word spread that Fenwick had been quietly dropped from 2 of his 4 state contracts after auditors began asking why unopened federal retention tags kept slipping through sales. He was, to be fair, not a cruel man. He had, more than once, given a fair price to a widow who needed to sell her husband's tools. He was only wrong, loudly and publicly, about the one box that mattered. The county offered Walter a reward, 10% of the appraised value of the bonds, nearly $2,000. Walter said no. He said the coins alone would cover what he'd already been paid to open it, and that was enough. He had never been offered money for finding something that belonged to somebody else, and he would have been embarrassed either way, to take it or to be thanked for refusing it. Thomas Reyes drove out from Lincoln to meet him. He was a broad-shouldered man with his mother's dark eyes, and he shook Walter's scarred hand for a long time without saying much. Eleanor Voss had died in 1988, 6 years before the vault opened. Thomas never got to sit across a table from her, but he had her letter in her own hand, telling him the one thing he had spent 22 years needing to hear. Walter went back to his shop that same afternoon. A woman needed a deadbolt rekeyed. He did it for $18, same as always. The vault itself now sits in the lobby of the new Merrow County Records building, door open, empty, a small brass plaque beside it explaining what it once held. Children touch the cold steel on school tours and ask their teachers what it is. Most of them are told it once kept something safe for a very long time. Roy Fenwick got a room full of people to laugh at a man doing his job for $75. Walter Kessler got a mother's letter into her son's hands 44 years late and asked for nothing in return. The question is not who was right at that auction. Everybody in that lot already knew. The question is what you do the next morning with something that isn't yours that nobody would ever know you kept quiet. What would you have done standing in that cold garage, alone at 10 o'clock at night with the door just barely open,